The tragic and enigmatic death of Pastor Zachery Timms, a man whose rise and fall rocked the Christian world, was shrouded in obscurity for more than 10 years. However, his wife has now spoken up after years of anguish, murmurs, and unsolved questions. Everything you believed to be true about their marriage, his ministry, and the secrets kept behind closed church doors will be called into doubt by what she is telling at 42. Keep an eye out, because what she just admitted could change the narrative that the world has been believing for years. For many years, Zachery Timms' name was heard in American church halls, gospel networks, and Christian homes. One of Florida's fastest-growing congregations is led by a young, charismatic pastor who came from the streets. He had an absolutely incredible story. But catastrophe came as fast as he had risen. Pastor Timms was discovered dead in a hotel room in New York City in 2011. A whirlwind of conjecture, bewilderment, and heartache ensued. Millions were shocked by his death. His church was in shock, and his family, especially his wife, Reva Timms, was in agonizing silence. Finally, more than 10 years later, that quiet has been shattered. Reva has made the decision to speak from the truth, rather from resentment. Her remarks have resurrected old wounds and shed new light on a subject that many believed had already been forgotten. What actually transpired behind their marriage's walls, behind the pulpit, and behind the celebrity? Why did she hold off on speaking until now? And what startling reality does she wish the world to know at last? We'll discover the lesser-known aspects of Pastor Zachery Timms' legacy in this video. The ascent, the decline, and the heartfelt admission that is rendering doubters and believers incredulous. You'll learn about the ministry that transformed countless lives, the love that ended in heartbreak, and the secrets that might have contributed to one of the most startling collapses in the history of the contemporary church. The media never dared to fully uncover what Reva tells about her husband's last years, so stay with me through to the finish. And believe me when I say that you won't want to miss her explanation of why she is finally speaking out. Let's start right at the beginning. There was simply a young man named Zachery Timms, a boy who faced the streets before he ever found the spotlight, before the fame, before the cameras, before the headlines, with the man who would become Pastor Zachery Timms, before the controversy, before the sad headlines. Sanctuary. Zachery was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and had a difficult upbringing. He was surrounded by brokenness, drugs, and criminality as a child, the sort of setting that might have easily engulfed him. Many people who knew him at the time didn't think he would ever turn into a man of God. However, Zachery's tale took a remarkable turn. He had a near-death experience as a teenager, which he would later characterize as a divine wake-up call. He asserted that there was a reason why God had spared him. He decided to leave the turmoil of his past behind and follow a new course based on faith, atonement, and purpose. As a result of this epiphany, following his conversion to Christianity, Timms studied the Bible with an appetite that astounded everyone around him. Being another preacher wasn't all he wanted. As a living example that no one was too far gone to be saved, he aspired to be a voice for the shattered. His metamorphosis was strong and captivating. He has what many churches did not. Every lecture felt personal because of the fire, street-level relatability, and unvarnished honesty. Before long, doors started and unvarnished honesty. Before long, doors started to open. After receiving his theological degree, Timms realized that his goal was to reach the forgotten and lost and demonstrate to them that if God could transform him, he could transform anyone. His path took him to Florida, where fate would bring him into contact with Reva, the lady who would soon alter his life irrevocably. Reva and Zachery seemed to have a similar calling when they first met. She possessed strength, intelligence, and a profound spirituality, the ideal ratio to his intensity and enthusiasm. They share a vision that went beyond a simple church. A movement was what they want, a location that offers hope and healing to people from all walks of life. When they founded the New Destiny Christian Center in Apopka, Florida in 1996, that goal came true. Their ministry began with a small group of members and quickly grew. With thousands of members each week, New Destiny quickly rose to prominence as one of the area's most significant churches. It was electric energy, joyful services that included testimonies and messages that changed people's lives. There had never been a style like that of Pastor Zachery. He wasn't aloof or rigid. He talked of hardship, temptation, and salvation as though he were a living example of all of these things, which he was. He was relatable because of his openness. He was memorable because of his charm, and people felt seen, forgiven, and changed by his sermons, which were frequently passionate and emotive. There are two sides to success. The pressures increased with the size of the church. Notoriety attracted attention. What had appeared to be unbreakable began to shatter under the influence of attention and temptation. Something sinister was starting to emerge beneath the stage lights and behind the grins. And those closest to him started to feel the struggle that was subtly taking over, even as the rest of the world only saw the grandeur. This is where it becomes genuinely tragic though, because Pastor Timms was losing control of his own life while simultaneously making a difference in the lives of millions. Pastor Zachery and Reva Timms' lives appeared to be a contemporary miracle. They had it all, rising from modest beginnings to become the leaders of one of America's fastest-growing churches. Influence, fame, fortune, and what seemed to be a faith-based, ideal marriage. However, something was cracking beneath the well-polished sermons and the dazzling church lights. Once based on unity, trust, and a common goal, their relationship started to deteriorate under the tremendous pressure of accomplishment. Couples' loved ones started to notice minor changes. Zachery had changed from a passionate, grounded man to someone else. The strain of overseeing thousands of people across several ministries and being in the spotlight all the time started to wear thin. Isolation gradually replaced the initial state of fatigue. He started turning to other riskier means of escape for solace rather than prayer or family. Zachery had started to fight against temptation and addiction, which he had previously preached so vehemently against. According to close friends and ministry insiders, he was battling his own demons in private. The same man who encouraged others to turn from immorality. Missed appointments, late nights, and inexplicable absences increased in frequency. Although rumors started to circulate among churchgoers, few were brave enough to challenge him. He was the one who had created new destiny from the ground up after all. But Reva witnessed the transformation firsthand. She stood next to him on the podium as his wife and co-pastor, but their relationship was in ruins behind closed doors. She had fought for their family, prayed for him, and wept for him. But sometimes, even love can't stop the mayhem that comes with celebrity. Power couple, who were previously inseparable, gradually drifted apart. Then, the infidelity was revealed, the turning point that would alter everything. According to reports, Zachery got into an affair that rocked their marriage and rocked the congregation. This was distressing for a man who had always advocated integrity. As soon as the media learned about it, their once immaculate ministry turned into a public scandal. Reva had to make the painful choice to leave the church. Their marriage and ministry collaboration came to an end when she filed for divorce. Although it was one of the most difficult choices she had ever made, she believed it was essential to her spiritual survival and personal recovery. As the controversy grew, Pastor Timms came clean and acknowledged that he had failed to live up to God's standards. He assured his followers that he was looking for support, attending therapy, and trying to rebuild his spiritual life. For a time, it appeared like he was getting better. He persisted in preaching, delivering stirring sermons, and re-establishing confidence with those who still trusted in his vocation. But an invisible conflict raged behind his efforts to advance. Addiction is a vicious and tenacious foe. Furthermore, it doesn't just go away when you will it to. He struggled with the loneliness that followed public humiliation, the pressures of redemption, and the fear of being judged. According to many, Zachery's charm was both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness. His words have the power to illuminate a room, but even his faith was unable to overcome the darkness he encountered when the lights went out. He struggled to balance being the man he still wanted to be with being the man that society expected him to be. Reva attempted to concentrate on healing in the interim. She gave her all to raising their kids and carrying on with her ministry work on her own, but the ache persisted. She never said anything negative about Zachery either. Even in interviews, she frequently emphasized faith and forgiveness, preferring grace to resentment. The heartache of seeing her children's father go out of control, however, never left her despite her composed front. For those who knew and loved Pastor Timms, the world came to a halt on that awful day in August 2011. He was discovered dead in a hotel room in New York City. Even though the reason of death was publicly publicized, many people didn't accept it. Later, the official autopsy would uncover startling information that many churchgoers and sympathizers found difficult to believe. Like wildfire, the news spread. Thousands expressed their shock on social media. How could a man lose his personal battle after preaching so fervently about redemption and deliverance? How could someone who had been so anointed fall so tragically? There were more questions than answers. However, one person stayed silent the entire time: Riva. Despite innumerable stories, interviews, and conjectures, she remained mute, attended his funeral, and kept her kids close. She resisted allowing rage to overpower love. However, she knew in her heart that she would eventually have to share her side of the story, not to expose him, but to provide healing, truth, and closure to a tale that had plagued her for years. For Pastor Zachery Timms, the summer of 2011 was meant to be a time of rejuvenation. He was finally regaining his footing, according to many close to him, after years of turbulence, public controversy, and personal rehabilitation attempts. He had started giving speeches at gatherings, interacting with churchgoers once more, and sharing themes of restoration, humility, and hope. To the general public, he appeared to be a broken man on the path to redemption, gradually rising from the ashes. Beneath that optimistic exterior, however, was a man still engaged in an invisible battle with himself. There were indications of weariness among those who spent time with him in those last weeks. Emotional exhaustion in addition to physical exhaustion. Later, friends remembered Zachery as being abnormally quiet, introspective, and solitary. Despite his passionate sermons and smiles, his eyes sent a different message. They bore the burden of remorse, guilt, and maybe a persistent worry that his inner battles would never be fully resolved. August 12, 2011 was a tragic day. In Times Square, New York, Pastor Zachery Timms was discovered unconscious in his room at the W Hotel. The Christian community was rocked by the finding. Social media erupted in shock and grief as news organizations rushed to broadcast the details. How did this occur? He was in New York, but why? More importantly, what had actually gone wrong? Few answers were given in the first reports. Although there were no indications of foul play, the authorities did discover something extremely concerning. A tiny packet with what appeared to be narcotics, a white powder. The revelation simply served to increase the mystery and spark conjecture. Quickly spreading rumors said that he had relapsed into past habits that he had previously overcome. Others, particularly his devoted supporters, didn't buy it. They believed that Pastor Timms was a man of God, thus they couldn't fathom his death being connected to drugs. What many had feared was confirmed by the official autopsy report. A combination of medications had caused Zachery Timms to die from acute intoxication. Those who had respected him were devastated by the harsh and agonizing reality. It was like losing a preacher and a sign of salvation for his church. It was the most heartbreaking loss his family could have imagined. And that was an unfathomable sadness for Riva. According to reports, Riva was devastated when she heard the news. He was still the father of her children, the guy she had once stood next to at the altar, and the partner with whom she had established a whole ministry. Despite everything they had experienced together, the separation, the public scrutiny, the emotional distance. It was an awful shock. She instantly shifted her attention to safeguarding her kids, insulating them from the harsh onslaught of online criticism and media attention that ensued. Pastor Timms's funeral was both tragic and lovely. To offer their respects, thousands of people gathered, from churchgoers to well-known gospel leaders and pastors. It was more than a simple service. It was a farewell to a guy who had experienced both tragedy and success in his life. The choir performed soothing songs, preachers talked about forgiveness and grace, and friends related how Zachery had impacted their lives. However, there was a strong sense of unresolved business and questions that no one could address, even in the midst of the consoling platitudes. Standing firm but clearly upset, Riva kept her composure during the event. She refrained from snapping. She did not denounce or defend. Silence was her choice, and it spoke a lot. The people who were curious about her true thoughts, knowledge, and potential revelations were only piqued by her poise. But beneath that serene appearance, Riva was experiencing unspeakable suffering. In addition to dealing with a world that would not stop talking about it, she was raising children who had tragically lost their father. She had to deal with questions from the media, criticism from strangers, and lingering recollections. The mystery surrounding Pastor Tim's death persisted for years after his passing. It was described by others as a warning story about the eye strain of ministry. For others, it served as a heartbreaking reminder that even individuals who inspire others to believe in God are fallible human beings susceptible to temptation and frailty. For Riva, however, it was much more profound. A personal loss that put all of her forbearance, faith, and strength to the test. After Zachery passed away, she seldom ever mentioned him in public. When she spoke, her words were healing-focused, polite, spiritual, and well-chosen. She frequently discussed the necessity for openness among spiritual leaders, the perils of seclusion, and significance of accountability in service. However, there was always a subdued reserve, as though she was withholding the whole tale. She is now seeking up more than 10 years later, not to relive the agony but to recover her truth. Riva has regained her voice at 42. Her choice to speak now has sparked controversy as well as sympathy by rekindling interest in her late husband's story. Her disclosures provide fresh insight into the man behind the pulpit, as well as the unseen challenges that many pastors encounter when the strain becomes unbearable. Riva Timms remained silent for over 10 years. She stayed still while interviewers reached out for her story and reporters looked for statements. A religious woman dealing with bereavement, motherhood, and her past's shadows. However, at 42, Riva has made the decision to speak up at last, to correct the record, not to show sympathy or to revisit wounds. Since her remarks are not motivated by rage, they have sparked controversy as well as emotion. They originate from a place of profound spiritual introspection, truth, and healing. There was a discernible serenity in Riva's voice when she first sat down to tell her story, a serenity that could only be achieved via time and prayer. She started off by discussing Zachery's humanity rather than his shortcomings. She said he was a man who loved God. He was a man who struggled, though. She encapsulated what many people find difficult to accept in those few words. God's frailty can strike anybody, even the anointed. Years of conjecture were broken by her candor. It was no longer about preserving a reputation. The goal was to make reality visible. Riva noted that she had seen Zachery's sorrow as well as his brilliance during their marriage. He could spend hours preaching about grace and deliverance. Behind the scenes, however, he was frequently struggling with fatigue, self-doubt, and demands of being perceived as flawless. She said he didn't always know how to help himself, but he wanted to help everyone. Many pastors, leaders, and Christians found resonance in those words because they recognized a mirror of their own personal challenges in Zachery's tale. She explained how love can become expectation, how pastors are frequently left feeling like they can never fail, and how fame can gently alter the dynamics of a ministry. She disclosed that the higher he went, the more lonelier he grew. Zachery did not lose his faith. It was that he silently lost his own feeling of tranquility while bearing the unsupportable burden of being everyone's hope. The charges and suspicions that had trailed their family for years were also addressed by Riva. She acknowledged her errors. She gave them her acknowledgement. She claimed that both of us made decisions that harmed our marriage. However, we both made an effort to correct it. Her admission served as a reminder to the world that every public crisis is the result of two human hearts attempting to mend privately. She made it apparent that forgiveness was a journey that took her years to complete rather than a quick fix. She acknowledged that she wasn't afraid or ashamed to speak when Zachery died. It served as defense, since her kids were still little and had a hard time comprehending why their father wasn't returning home. She wanted to protect them. Knowing that the media would turn anything she said into another headline, she decided to keep her peace. Above all else, she wished to preserve Zachery's legacy, the aspect of him that genuinely loved God and others, not the public persona. Riva also revealed in her disclosure how sadness served as her instructor. She had to face pain she had repressed for years after losing Zachery. She admitted that there were times when I screamed to God, asking him why he permitted this to occur. However, I rediscover my own purpose at those moments of breakdown. She rediscovered herself as a woman called by God in her own right, not as Pastor Tim's wife, as a result of that suffering. Her new message, which is compelling and forceful, is about ministry transparency. She reminds believers that spiritual leaders are also people, and she speaks candidly about the perils of idolizing pastors. She added, "We put them on pedestals, and when they fall, we behave as though they are no longer worthy of grace." In actuality, however, grace was always reserved for the wounded. Since then, her remarks have gained a lot of traction in both online and ecclesiastical groups. Some have condemned her for reviving old wounds, while others have complimented her for her boldness. Riva, however, is unfazed. She clarifies that the reason she chose to speak now had nothing to do with the past. Freeing people from silence is the goal. "It was worth it if my story helps even one person find healing," she added. During her speeches and interviews, Riva also discussed how her experience motivated her to serve others through her ministry at Orlando, Florida's Majestic Life Church. There, she emphasizes spiritual development, emotional healing, and forgiveness not via perfection, but with genuineness. Her church has developed into a haven for people who have experienced loss, betrayal, and suffering. People who need to understand that even after failing, God's grace still finds them. Her discussion of forgiveness is arguably the most poignant aspect of her disclosure. She describes Zachery as a man who was incredibly loved and flawed, rather than as a man defined by his mistakes. "I forgive him because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened," she remarked quietly. "It's about releasing yourself from its burden." Her voice broke in that instant, not out of weakness, but out of release. Peace after years of suppressed emotion. Her remarks served as a reminder to those in attendance that forgiveness, especially when the world demands resentment, is the path to closure rather than time alone. There is more to Riva's story than a failed marriage or a fallen pastor. It is about the strength of grace, the truthfulness of human weakness, and the bravery required to speak the truth after years of silence. It's about choosing healing over hurt and the beauty that can emerge from ashes. Her story is compelling, but it has also brought up new issues, inquiries concerning the demands placed on pastors, the function of accountability in the ministry, and the church's response to dysfunctional leaders. And now, those inquiries are igniting meaningful discussions in religious communities all around the world.